I lost my virginity on my wedding day, but it wasn't with my fiancé, and you would never guess who it was, not even in your worst nightmare. It was someone who slept under the same roof as me since childhood. Someone my mother put food on the plate for every day. Someone who sat at the dinner table, pretending to be a decent person while planning to destroy an innocent child. Someone I called with such affection, who gave me rides on the back of his bicycle, who I admired as if he were my personal hero. But behind that protective smile, those sweet words, those hugs I thought were innocent, hid a monster who was just waiting for the right opportunity to devour me. And his opportunity was precisely the day that should have been the most sacred of my life. What happened after? Well, let's just say that person never troubled anyone again, because when I decided to speak up and tell the truth, even knowing it would blow up my family, even knowing it would turn the town upside down, justice came in a way I never expected. It wasn't the justice of the courts, it wasn't the justice of men in suits and ties. It was a much rawer, much more definitive justice. A justice that happens when men who also have daughters, sisters, wives, discover what kind of disgusting creature was breathing the same air as them. But do you have the stomach to hear how this worm paid for what he did? Because what happened to him in jail was so violent that it still gives me chills to this day, but it also gives me a peace I never thought I would feel. Hello, dear viewers. I'm Eunice, but everyone calls me Grandma Eunice. I'm 78 years old and live here in a small house in Virginia that I absolutely adore. I'm sitting on my porch in this rocking chair my dear Alvin gave me. Poor thing. It's been so long now. Today, I've decided to open my heart to you about something I've kept inside for over 50 years. Where are you all watching from? I'm curious. I imagine each of you there, perhaps enjoying a cup of coffee like I love to do every afternoon. I want you to feel comfortable with me, because what I'm about to share isn't easy, but it needs to finally come out. You must be thinking, goodness, what happened to this sweet old lady? Well, my angels, it was someone from my own family who ruined what should have been the most beautiful day of my life. Someone I loved with all my heart, someone I respected as if they were a saint, someone I thought would always protect me. But they didn't protect me. Quite the opposite. You can't imagine the pain of discovering that the person you trusted most in the world, the one whose arms you ran into when you had nightmares, the one you asked for blessing every day before leaving home, could look you in the eye and betray you in the worst possible way. It's a pain without a name, without remedy, that sticks to your soul like a wound that never heals. Imagine a girl who grew up believing family was sacred, that an older brother meant guaranteed protection, that nothing bad could happen under the roof where you were born. That's how I thought, my dears. That's how I lived until I discovered the monster was inside the house all along, sitting at the same table, eating the same food, saying the same prayers, pretending to be decent while planning my downfall. And the worst part? When something like this happens within your own family, you have nowhere to run, because it's your word against theirs. It's your version against the version of the family's golden boy, the son who never caused trouble, the brother everyone admired. Who would believe a hysterical woman over a respected man? That's what they do to us. They want us to believe we're crazy, that we're making things up, exaggerating. After what that demon did to me, I had to make an incredibly difficult decision, one that would change not just my life, but the lives of everyone I loved. I knew that if I opened my mouth, there would be no going back. It would be like throwing a bomb into the middle of the family and watching the pieces fly everywhere. I could either keep quiet for the rest of my life, swallowing that pain, pretending nothing happened, carrying that weight until the day I died, or I could tell the truth in front of everyone, in a packed church, at the altar itself, during the most sacred moment a woman can have in her life. And do you think I stayed quiet, like a good little girl? Not at all. I opened my mouth and told everything without leaving anything out. But you don't know what it was like to go through those minutes before making that decision. There at the altar, with everyone watching, expecting me to say yes to the man I loved, while inside I was screaming with pain, with rage, with desperation. It felt like two people were fighting within me. One who wanted to forget everything and move on, and another who shouted that I couldn't start a marriage based on a lie. Because how could I look into Alvin's eyes, this blessed man who truly loved me, and pretend I was the same pure woman he had asked to marry? How could I lie in bed with him on our wedding night, knowing that hours before, my own brother had taken advantage of me in the most brutal way possible? How could I live the rest of my life carrying that terrible secret? The worst part was that he was absolutely certain I would stay silent. He knew how I was raised. He knew I was a family girl who had been taught not to cause scandals, not to give people something to talk about. He bet everything on my upbringing, on my fear, on my shame. He thought I would be just another woman who swallows her tears and goes on with life pretending nothing happened. But you know what he didn't know? That inside this little old lady here always lived a lioness. A lioness who might have been sleeping, but when she wakes up, when she's provoked, when she's cornered, woe to anyone who stands in her way. And that day, at that altar, that lioness woke up with a thirst for justice that I didn't even know existed within me. To help you understand how I arrived at that horrible day, I need to go back to the beginning of my little life. You'll see how sometimes evil is right under our noses, growing, feeding, waiting for the right moment to attack. Because the demon who destroyed me didn't come from outside. He grew up in my own house. I was born in 1947 into a very traditional family in Virginia, in an era when a woman was born with her destiny already mapped out. Grow up proper, marry as a virgin, have children, and obey her husband until death. There were 6 of us at home, Dad, Mom, and us 5 children. I was the baby of the family, the only girl among 4 brothers. And do you know what that meant in those days? I was the princess, the protected one, the one the brothers had to take care of like a treasure. What a bitter irony of life, right? To be protected by the very one who would destroy me. My father, Mr. John, may he rest in peace, was a tailor, such a good man, more serious than you can imagine. A man of few words but much work. He'd spend the whole day hunched over his sewing machine, making suits for the fancy men in town, always with that focused posture of someone who takes life seriously. His hands were always stained with tailor's chalk, with small cuts from needles, and the smell of new fabric stuck to his clothes like perfume. He would wake up before sunrise and only stop when night had fallen. He was a hard-working man who believed that with honesty and dedication, we could succeed in life. Poor thing. He had no idea that inside his own house, under the same roof he worked so hard to maintain, a creature was growing who would forever tarnish the family name. In raising his children, Dad didn't let anyone get away with anything. My child has to be upright, he always said, must respect elders, protect the young, and never, ever dishonor the family name. How it must have hurt him to discover that one of the sons he raised with so much love had become the opposite of everything he taught. My mother, Donna Constance, how I miss her, how I wish I could smell her hair one more time, helped with expenses by sewing dresses for the society ladies. This blessed woman worked as hard as my father, but still had to take care of the house and 5 children. I grew up watching her bent over lace and embroidery, always with pins in her mouth and a ruler in hand, her fingers calloused from so much sewing, always with that infinite patience that only a mother has. She was the one who kept order in the house and took care of our education, especially mine, because I was a girl. Eunice, she would say all the time, you have to be even more careful than your brothers. A respectable woman doesn't give reason for gossip. Poor mother, teaching her daughter to protect herself from the wolves in the street, not knowing the most dangerous wolf was inside the house, pretending to be a lamb. She taught me to embroider, to cook, to keep house, but most importantly, she taught me about honor, about dignity, about how a family girl should behave. Your reputation is your most precious asset, she would repeat. Once lost, it can never be recovered. And I kept every word of hers in my heart, thinking that by following all her teachings, I would be protected from any harm. The upbringing I had was very strict, from a time when a proper girl couldn't even talk to a boy without someone nearby, supervising every word, every look. Just imagine, I had never been alone with any man until my wedding day. Not even for 5 minutes. It was a different time, you see, a time when we obeyed father and mother without questioning. When marriage was serious business and for life. When a respectable woman guarded her purity like a diamond. I grew up believing all this protection was out of love, out of care, that my parents and brothers did it because they loved me, because they wanted to preserve me for a future husband who would value me. It never crossed my mind that all that protection could be useless when the danger came from within the home itself. My brothers were all older than me, and each had his way of protecting me. Anthony was the closest, 3 years ahead, always playful, but jealous when he saw any boy looking at me. Then came Joseph, 5 years older, more serious, the type who settled things with his fists when necessary. Frank was 6 years older than me. He was the most studious, always with his head in books, but also kept an eye on who approached his little sister. But the one who protected me most, whom I admired most, whom I thought was my guardian angel on earth, was Richard. He was 8 years older than me. So, when I was a little girl of 7 or 8, he was already a young man of 15 or 16, with that natural authority of an older brother, that presence that made everyone respect him. And my goodness, how I admired this man. Richard was the pride of the whole family, the whole street, the whole town, intelligent like nobody else, hard-working as an ant, respected by everyone, from the mayor to the last resident of the town. Everyone spoke of him as an example. Look at Richard, what an exemplary young man. If all young people were like Richard, the world would be better. How lucky John's family is to have a son like Richard. And I would beam with pride when I heard these things. He's my brother, I would think, all proud. This wonderful man everyone admires is my older brother. How foolish I was, my God. How innocent. I thought I knew him, thought I knew who he really was beneath that perfect mask he wore for everyone. He would take me to school when it was raining, pedaling slowly so I wouldn't be afraid, always leaving me at the door and waiting for me to enter before going away. He would scare away the boys who bothered me with that protective way that made any boy run just from seeing his face. He would bring me candy when he came back from downtown, always remembering his little sister, always with that affectionate smile that melted my heart. I saw him as my hero, you know, as my personal protector, my knight in shining armor. When I had nightmares, it was him I called. When someone bothered me at school, it was to him I ran crying. When I grew up, I wanted to marry a man like Richard, strong, protective, respected, who would take care of me like he did. Never, not even in my worst nightmares, not even in my darkest imaginings, did I imagine that one day he would be my greatest tormentor, that the same hands that protected me would hurt me in the worst possible way, that the same mouth that consoled me when I cried would utter the most terrible threats a woman can hear, that the same man who chased the big bad wolves away from me was the most dangerous wolf of all. During all those years, he built this perfect image, this impeccable reputation, not just with me, but with the whole family, with the whole town. It was as if he knew that one day he would need that shield, that credibility, so that when the time came to commit the monstrosity he committed, no one would believe he was capable of such a thing. Because you see, the diabolical strategy, the more respected he was, the more saintly he appeared, the harder it would be for anyone to believe he could do what he did to me. It was a perfect plan, thought out over years, built brick by brick, until it formed a wall of respectability that seemed impenetrable. When I turned 20-something, my parents started to worry about my marriage, as was normal at that time. In those days, a girl who wasn't married by 25 was considered on the shelf, a shame to the family, a weight on the parents' conscience. Does Eunice have some flaw that nobody notices? Is she too demanding? Poor thing, she'll end up an old maid. That's when Alvin came into my life like a gift from God. He was the son of a family who were friends of my parents, known, respected, of good standing. A hard-working young man, of good character, who had an organized little life, a promising future. He was everything parents could wish for their daughter: stability, respect, good family. And do you know who was the first to approve of Alvin? Who gave his blessing for this courtship to begin? Richard. "This young man is good for Eunice," he told my parents. "He's serious, hardworking, will take good care of her." At the time, I thought it was lovely that he was concerned about my happiness. Today, I know he was planning how to taint my life before it really began. The courtship was all proper, the way it was done in those days, with all the formality a proper family demanded. Alvin would come to our house on Sundays, sit in the living room talking to me, always with my parents nearby, never alone, never without supervision. We corresponded by letters for almost 2 years before the engagement. Letters that Richard sometimes took to the post office, saying he wanted to help his lovesick little sister. When Alvin asked for my hand in marriage, it was a celebration at home. Finally, I was going to get married and make my parents proud. I would leave home as an honorable young woman to build my own family. And who was happiest about my engagement? Richard. "My little sister is going to be the most beautiful bride in Virginia," he would say, hugging me, congratulating me. Now I know why he was so happy. It wasn't happiness for my achievement, for my happiness. It was the diabolical happiness of someone who was already planning to destroy everything. It was the wicked satisfaction of someone who knew he was going to transform the most beautiful day of my life into my worst nightmare. He already knew what he was going to do to me. He already had everything calculated, everything thought out, everything coldly planned. And I continued there, the foolish little sister, blindly trusting my protector, my hero, not knowing that he was, in fact, the demon who would drag me to hell on earth. The wedding preparations lasted months. Mom sewed my wedding dress with such care, such dedication. It was a simple dress, but beautiful, full of details that only she knew how to make. The whole family was involved in the organization. It would be a modest ceremony, but dignified, in the neighborhood church, where we had always attended. I was so excited, so happy. I dreamed of that day, imagined what it would be like to be a wife, have my own home, my own family. But what I didn't know is that some people we love most are capable of destroying our dreams in a second, and that day, which should have been the most beautiful of my life, would become my worst nightmare. Richard always showed himself to be very protective of me, especially when it came to the wedding. He was the one who talked with Alvin when there was something to settle. He was the one who gave input on the preparations. Everyone thought that older brother protection was beautiful. I thought so too, until I discovered that behind all that protection was something very dark hidden. On the morning of my wedding, while I was getting ready in the little back room of the house, he appeared knocking at the door. He said he needed to talk to me before the ceremony, that he had discovered something about Alvin that could change my decision about the marriage. Foolish as I was, I opened the door right away. After all, he was my brother, my protector, right? How could I be suspicious of him? But that's when, my dears, the story gets truly heavy. What happened in that little room changed my life forever. And you'll see that sometimes the person who should protect us is precisely the one who hurts us most. But you'll also see that when a woman decides not to remain silent, the consequences can be much more dramatic than anyone imagines. It was March 13th, 1971, a Saturday morning that was too beautiful. The sun was coming through the little window of my room, illuminating the wedding dress that Mom had hung up with such care. I woke up early, heart beating fast with that nice feeling of when we're anxious for good things in life. Little did I imagine that a few hours later, I would be living the worst nightmare of my existence. The house was all hustle and bustle. Mom was coming and going with the last things to organize. My brothers getting ready in their suits. Dad trying to fix his tie that wouldn't stay straight. Everything normal, everything as I had always dreamed it would be. The neighbors were passing by the window, greeting, wishing happiness. It was that good energy of a special day, you know? I had taken a long bath that blessed morning, really long, letting the warm water run over my body while thinking about how perfect it would be to be Mrs. Alvin. I had put on that French perfume I had received as a wedding gift from my godmother, a beautiful bottle that I kept like a treasure, and styled my hair the way we had rehearsed the week before, with those delicate curls that framed my face. I was just in a white slip, all lace, that Mom had embroidered especially for this day. A slip she made thinking only my future husband would see it in the privacy of our marital bedroom after the priest's blessing. I was going to put on the wedding dress at the very last minute so it wouldn't wrinkle, to arrive at the church perfect, impeccable, as every bride dreams of arriving. I looked in the mirror and felt like the most beautiful woman in the world. I felt special, chosen, blessed. How many brides must have felt that way on the morning of their wedding, right? All with that nice flutter in the stomach, all dreaming of the Prince Charming who would make their lives complete. All thinking nothing bad could happen on the most important day of their lives. How innocent we are when we're happy. How vulnerability comes with happiness. I was there in my little room, small but cozy, surrounded by the things I loved most, the rag dolls that Mom made, the prayer books, the crucifix I received at my first communion. Everything smelled of lavender and fulfilled dreams. The wedding dress hanging there on the wall looked like a white angel protecting me, blessing me for the new life that was about to begin. It was my sanctuary, my safe place since childhood. The place where I cried when I was sad, where I prayed when I was worried, where I daydreamed about my future. Never, never, ever did it cross my mind that that sacred little corner would become the setting for my greatest nightmare. That's when there was a knock at my bedroom door. 3 little knocks, very light, almost delicate, a touch that wasn't scary, that didn't seem threatening. If I had known that those 3 little knocks would divide my life into before and after. Eunice, it's me, Richard. I need to talk to you before the ceremony. His voice was strange, different from normal, kind of tense, how can I explain? Kind of thick, but I thought it was just nervousness, emotion at seeing his little sister getting married. After all, it was his little sister's wedding, right? Normal for a brother who always protected me to be a bit emotional on a day like this. Perhaps he wanted to give me some advice, tell me something affectionate before the ceremony. Can you wait a little bit, Richard? I'm just in my slip here, I said to him through the door, with that naturalness of someone who doesn't imagine any danger. After all, he was my brother, my protector of always. What harm could there be in him seeing me in a robe? How many times in childhood had he not helped me when I fell and scraped my knee, carried me in his arms when I was hurt? But he insisted, and his insistence had a tone I had never heard before. A strange urgency, an anxiety that gave me a chill down my spine. It's important, Eunice. There's something about Alvin you need to know. It could change your decision about the marriage. My heart froze right then. Froze and started to beat erratically, as if it already knew something terrible was coming. What about Alvin? What decision? My world stopped for a second. Had my brother discovered something terrible about my fiancé? Some dark secret? Some betrayal? Some lie that would destroy my happiness? My mind flew to 1,000 horrible possibilities. Did Alvin have another woman? Did he have hidden debts? Did he not really love me? All these questions hammering in my head while I rushed to put the robe on over the slip. My hand was shaking when I pulled the fabric, when I tied the belt at the waist. And then, like a fool, like an innocent who still believed family was sacred, I opened the door. Richard came in quickly with a rush that didn't match him. And before I could understand what was happening, before my brain processed the danger, he locked the door from inside. The sound of the key turning in the lock echoed in the little room like a shot. That left me uncomfortable right away. A strange sensation, a discomfort I couldn't explain. "What are you doing, Richard? Why did you lock the door?" My voice came out higher than normal, with that tone of someone who's already starting to get scared, even without understanding why yet. He turned to me slowly, very slowly, like a predator that had finally cornered its prey. And that's when I saw it. I saw in his eyes something I had never seen before, something that made my blood freeze in my veins. It was a look, how can I explain to you? It was a look of hunger, but not hunger for food. It was hunger for something bad, something dirty, something that shouldn't exist between siblings. It was the look of a wolf that had removed the sheep's disguise and shown its fangs. It was the look of a man who was no longer my brother, who perhaps had never really been my brother. It was the look of someone who had planned that moment, who had waited years for that opportunity, who knew exactly what he was going to do to me. What happened next changed my life completely. The person I had trusted most betrayed me in a way that can't be described in words. Things were done that shouldn't be done between brother and sister. Lines were crossed that can never be uncrossed. After what seemed like an eternity of horror, he got up as if nothing had happened, as if he had just had a glass of water. He adjusted his clothes with the calm of someone who had just completed a routine task. Ran his hand through his hair, checked if everything was in place. His coldness was more frightening than the violence itself. It was as if I were nothing more than an object he had used and was now going to put back in the drawer. And then came the final blow, the cherry on top of the wickedness. After I leave, you're going to get dressed, smile, and get married as if nothing happened, because if you tell anyone anything, I'll say it was you who seduced me, that you came on to me. And who will they believe? The crazy, hysterical bride, or the respected brother everyone admires? His words were like stabs to what was left of my dignity. He hadn't just violated me physically, but now he was violating me psychologically, stealing from me even the right to seek justice. He was turning me into an accomplice in what he'd done to me, forcing me to carry that pain alone for the rest of my life. And the worst part was, he was right. Who would believe me against him? He, the exemplary son, the protective brother, the pride of the family, against me, a disturbed bride making up stories on her own wedding day. The male chauvinist society of that time always doubted a woman's word, always found a way to blame the victim. He left the room as if nothing had happened, leaving the door unlocked, returning to the party as if he were the same man as always. And he left me there shattered, bleeding inside and out, with pieces of my torn slips scattered on the floor like the remains of a barbaric crime. The wedding dress continued to hang on the wall, immaculate, perfect, looking at me like a mute witness to all that horror. That dress that should have transformed me into the happiest woman in the world now seemed to mock me, reminding me of what I had lost, what I would never recover. It was the cruelest irony, the symbol of purity, observing the destruction of innocence. I stayed there I don't know how long, paralyzed, trying to understand what had happened, trying to make my brain process a reality so absurd it seemed like a nightmare. How could my own brother have done that to me? How could it happen on my wedding day? How could it happen in my own house, under the same roof where we grew up together, where we shared so many happy moments? It was as if the world had turned upside down in a matter of minutes, as if everything I believed, everything I knew about life, about family, about love, had been a gigantic lie. And now I was there, shattered, having to decide whether to take that terrible truth to the grave or find the strength to shout to the whole world who that monster really was. The worst part was that I could hear the movement outside. Mom calling that it was time to get ready, the neighbors arriving to help me with the dress, Dad talking with Richard as if nothing had happened. Life continued normal for everyone, except for me. My world had collapsed, but outside it was all joy and celebration. I managed to get up from the bed, even with wobbly legs and a terrible pain below. I looked in the mirror and was startled by what I saw. Hair disheveled, eyes swollen from crying, purple mark on my arm where he had held me. How was I going to explain that? How was I going to disguise it? How was I going to pretend everything was fine when my world had just collapsed? I tried to wash myself, compose myself, hide the marks as best I could. Put thick foundation on my arm, combed my hair again, dried the tears. When Mom knocked on the door, asking if I was ready, I answered with a voice that didn't even sound like mine. "I'm coming, Mom, just one more minute." I put on that beautiful dress she had made with so much love that should have made me the happiest woman in the world, but now seemed like a cruel disguise. Each little button I closed, each little bow I tied, it was as if I were preparing for a funeral. My own funeral, because Eunice, the dreamer, the innocent, had died in that little room. The walk to the church was the longest of my life. Everyone smiling, greeting me, saying how beautiful I was. And there I was smiling back, pretending I was happy when inside I was screaming with pain and rage. Alvin was waiting for me at the altar, all dressed up, with that loving smile, not knowing that the woman he was going to marry was no longer the same one he had asked to marry. And it was there, standing in front of the altar, hearing the priest talk about love, about fidelity, about sacred matrimony, that I had to make the hardest decision of my life. Because when he asked if anyone had anything against that marriage, if anyone knew of any impediment, I felt my mouth opening, and what came out of it changed everything forever. When I reached the church door, my father gave me his arm, and we began to climb that walkway that seemed infinite. Everyone standing, smiling, some crying with emotion, the organ playing the wedding march, the flowers adorning the pews, the smell of incense in the air. It should have been magical, but for me, it was as if I were walking to my own burial. Alvin was there at the altar, handsome in his navy blue suit that he had made specially for this day, with that radiant smile that always melted my heart, that made my world complete. But when our eyes met for the first time on that day that should have been magical, his smile wilted a little, like a flower that suddenly loses vigor. He must have realized right away that something was very wrong with me. My eyes must have been too red, swollen from crying silently, trying to disguise the desperation with face powder and mascara that smudged all the time. My smile must have been too forced, artificial like a store window doll, trembling at the corners as if it were about to collapse at any moment. Those who truly love notice these things, right? They feel when the loved one is suffering, even when they try to hide it. And Alvin truly loved me. He saw on my face that something terrible had happened, but how could he imagine what? How could a good, honest man from a traditional family even conceive that someone would be capable of doing what had been done to me? In his head, I must have just been nervous, emotional, with that normal bride's flutter in the stomach. Dad handed me over to Alvin, with that immense pride in his chest that every father feels when he sees his daughter getting married, when he sees that he managed to raise a proper girl who will build her own family. His hands were trembling with emotion when he passed me to my fiancé, as if he were handing over his most precious possession, which he was. He gave me a loving little kiss on the forehead, one of those daddy kisses you keep in your heart forever. And he whispered with a choked-up voice, "Be happy, my daughter. Be very happy." If he had known what had happened an hour before in that little back room of our house, if he had known that while he was getting all dressed up proudly for his daughter's wedding, a monster was destroying the child he had raised with so much love, so much care. Poor father, who worked sun to give the best to the family, who killed himself making suits for others, just to see his children grow up right. How it would hurt his heart to discover that one of the sons he loved was capable of such a monstrosity. But he didn't know, nobody knew, nobody suspected that, behind those smiles and congratulations, was hidden the most heinous crime a family could shelter. Only I knew. Only I carried that terrible weight, that excruciating pain, that secret that weighed more than the whole world. Only me and that monster who was there in the first row of the church, all dressed up in his Sunday suit, pretending to be the protective brother as always. There he was, Richard, with an angel's face, with the posture of a respectable man, receiving the compliments of people who said how proud he must be of his little sister, how beautiful it was to see such a dedicated brother. And he smiled with that disgusting falseness, with that hypocrisy that made me nauseated. The priest Anthony, who had known me since I was little, who had baptized me, who had given me my first communion, began the ceremony with that warm smile of his, full of affection and expectation. My dear brothers and sisters, we are gathered here in the presence of God to celebrate the sacred union of Eunice and Alvin, two young people who love each other and want to build together a blessed family. His words echoed through the church, ricocheting off the ancient walls, rising to the high ceiling. But to me they sounded as if they were coming from very far away, as if I had cotton in my ears, as if there were an invisible barrier between me and the rest of the world. I was physically there, standing at the altar, dressed as a bride. But my soul, my essence had stayed in that cursed little room, shattered along with the pieces of my torn slip. It was as if I had split into two people, one who represented the happy bride everyone expected to see, and another who screamed with pain and despair inside. My mind was frantically flying between the physical pain I still felt in my body, that terrible, excruciating pain that reminded me every second of what had happened, and the anger that was growing in my chest like a spreading fire, an anger I had never felt before that scared me by its intensity. Anger at him, of course, at the monster who had hurt me, but also anger at myself for having opened that door, for having trusted, for having been so naive. Anger at the world that allowed things like this to happen. Anger at God, who had let this happen precisely on the day that should have been the most sacred of my life. When the priest reached that part everyone knows, that every bride hears, but never thinks will be important. If anyone has knowledge of any impediment to this union, any reason why these two should not be united in holy matrimony, speak now or forever, hold your peace. Normally, everyone stays quiet, right? It's just an old formality, a tradition no one takes seriously. Everyone knows no one will stand up, no one will say anything. The ceremony will continue normally until the "you may kiss the bride." But at that moment, as those words echoed through the church, I felt a strange, powerful, frightening thing rising in my throat. It was as if a supernatural force had taken control of me, as if something much greater than myself was pushing me forward, forcing me to do what I never imagined I would be capable of doing. An energy that came I don't know from where, whether from God, from desperation, from accumulated rage, from the desperate need for justice. My eyes automatically turned to Richard, who was there in the first row, very close to the altar, all elegant in his dark suit, with crossed arms, with an expression of absolute superiority of someone who thought he was on top of the world, the master of the situation. He looked at me with that discreet but devilish smile, that look that said, "You don't have the courage, you won't do anything, you're going to swallow this for the rest of your life like a good obedient girl." He was absolutely, unshakably certain that I was going to stay quiet as a tomb, that I was going to swallow that forever, take that secret with me to the day of my death. He was certain that a little girl like me, raised in the rigor of good education, would never have the courage to expose her own family, to cause such a scandal in a church full of respectable people, to destroy the reputation the family had taken years to build. He was betting on my shame, on my fear of social judgment, on my rigorous education that taught me that a family woman doesn't give people something to talk about. He was betting I would prefer to die inside rather than face the stares, the whispers, the venomous tongues that would be unleashed after the revelation. But you know what happens when a person reaches their absolute limit? When accumulated pain becomes a bomb about to explode. When fear transforms into desperate courage, when the need for justice becomes greater than any other consideration. That's exactly what happened to me at that decisive moment in my life. Suddenly, as if a light had turned on in my head, as if the scales had fallen from my eyes, I realized that it no longer mattered what people would think. The scandal I was going to cause no longer mattered. The family's embarrassment no longer mattered. Nothing mattered anymore except the naked, raw truth that needed to be told. Because if I stayed silent at that moment, if I swallowed that and moved on, pretending nothing had happened, I would die inside every single day for the rest of my life. I would look in the mirror and see a coward. I would lie in bed with Alvin carrying a gigantic lie. I would raise my children knowing I had left a monster unpunished, freely circulating through the family. I need to speak. The words came out of my mouth with a strength I didn't know I had, even before my conscious mind realized what I was doing. It was as if my soul had taken control of the situation, as if the need for truth was stronger than any fear, any shame, any social consideration. A deathly, sepulchral, frightening silence took hold of the entire church. It was as if time had stopped, as if the air had become heavier, as if even the angels had held their breath to hear what I was going to say. The priest stopped speaking mid-sentence and looked at me astonished, with those wide eyes of someone who can't believe what they're hearing. Alvin squeezed my hand tighter, confused, worried, trying to understand what was happening, why his bride had interrupted her own wedding ceremony. All those people who were there to celebrate my wedding, to witness my happiness, now looked at me with a mixture of curiosity, astonishment, and apprehension, anxiously waiting to know what I was going to say. It was as if I had thrown a grenade into the middle of the church and everyone had frozen waiting for the explosion. The murmurs ceased, the children stopped crying, even the wind outside seemed to stop blowing. It was a silence loaded with expectation, with tension, with the presentiment that something very serious was about to happen. I have an impediment to speak? Yes. My voice was trembling like a leaf in the wind, but firm like a rock in a storm. My heart was beating so hard it seemed it would explode inside my chest, that it would come out through my mouth, that everyone would be able to hear the desperate beats. It was the most decisive moment of my life, the moment that would divide my existence into before and after. An hour ago, while I was getting ready for my wedding, while the whole family was preparing for this celebration, my brother Richard came into my room and violated my dignity in the most brutal and cowardly way. A muffled scream, a collective groan of horror echoed through the church like a shockwave. Some women put their hands to their mouths, horrified. Others began to cry. Men clenched their fists in rage. He took my virtue on the day of my wedding, in my own home, in my own room. He threatened me, saying no one would believe me, that everyone would think I was making up a story to avoid getting married. The words came one after the other like a waterfall of truth, as if they had a life of their own, as if they had been dammed up for so long that now they flowed with uncontrollable force. I can't start my marriage based on a terrible lie. I can't pretend nothing happened when it did indeed. And everyone here needs to know what kind of monster my brother is, what kind of demon hides behind that mask of a respectable man. You need to know who Richard really is. And then it was as if I had detonated an atomic bomb in the middle of the church. The world collapsed. Richard turned white as tissue paper, a cadaverous pallor that rose from his neck to the root of his hair. For a second, it looked like he was going to faint right there, that his legs would fail and he would collapse on the church floor. But then survival spoke louder, the instinct for self-preservation, and he jumped up from the chair as if he had received an electric shock. "What madness is this? What made-up story is this?" he shouted with a high-pitched, desperate voice, but one that was trembling like jelly. It was the voice of a cornered man, of a discovered liar, of someone who knew that the house of cards of his reputation was collapsing brick by brick, and those who knew him well, like my parents who had raised him since he was little, realized right away that something was very wrong there. "Are you crazy, Eunice? Do you have a fever? Are you delirious?" He was trying to act indignant, like an unjustly victimized person, but the desperation was stamped on his face like a tattoo. "How can you invent such a story at your own wedding? What kind of madness has taken hold of you?" But his words came out rushed, sweaty, desperate. It was like watching a bad actor, trying to play a role he didn't know, trying to fake an indignation he didn't feel. The trembling voice betrayed the fear, the wide eyes showed the panic, the trembling hands revealed the guilt. "I'm not making anything up, Richard, nothing at all." My voice came out firmer now, fueled by the certainty that I was doing the right thing, that each word I spoke was a step away from darkness. "And everyone here can see from the state I'm in that it's not a lie. Look at me. Look closely." I took the veil off my head with a decisive gesture, showing my disheveled hair, revealing what the thick foundation hadn't managed to hide properly. I showed the purple bruise on my arm, where he had held me with brutal force, the marks of his fingers impressed on my skin as irrefutable evidence of the crime. "Look here at the marks he left on me. See these purple bruises. Look at my eyes swollen from crying so much, at my devastated face." I lifted the sleeve of the dress for everyone to see better, ignoring the horrified gasps that spread through the church. "Do you think I would invent such a thing on the most important day of my life? Do you think I would destroy my own wedding out of caprice?" People began to stir like an anthill that had been poked. Some men quickly rose from their chairs with that face of someone who wanted to do justice with their own hands, looking at Richard with a murderous rage that was frightening. "You bastard, how could you do such a thing to your own sister?" someone shouted from the back. "On the day of the girl's wedding." Meanwhile, the women whispered among themselves, horrified, with their hands covering their mouths, eyes wide with shock and indignation. "How horrible! Poor girl, how could he dare? What a monster!" It was a growing murmur of revolt that was taking over the church like a high tide. My parents were in total, absolute shock, as if they had received a blow to the head. They couldn't process what they were hearing, couldn't make the information reach their brains properly. Dad looked from me to Richard, trying to understand how that was possible, how two children he had raised with so much love could be involved in such a terrible situation. Mom had both hands on her chest, breathing with difficulty, as if the air had become too heavy to enter her lungs. Her face was a portrait of the deepest pain a mother can feel. Seeing one child destroying the other, seeing the family she had built, with such care, being torn apart in the worst possible way. My brother told me no one would believe me, because he is the eldest son, the most respected in the family, the pride of you all. My voice was gaining strength, fueled by the truth that could finally be told. He said that if I told anyone anything, he would spread that it was I who seduced him, that he would reverse the roles and transform me into the guilty one. But do you really think a family girl, a bride at the altar, would invent such a story to destroy her own wedding? What diabolical logic would that be? What woman would be crazy enough to ruin the most important day of her life just to harm someone? Alvin was by my side like a solid rock, holding my hand tightly, with tears streaming down his face. Tears that were a mixture of rage for what had been done to me, sadness for my pain, and pride for the courage I was showing. "She's right," he said loudly for everyone to hear, with a voice that echoed throughout the entire church. "A woman doesn't invent such a thing. There is no woman in the world who would invent that she was violated. And look at her condition." He pointed to my face, to my bruised arm. "Do you think she would be like this, shattered like this, if something terrible hadn't happened? Use your heads, people." Father Anthony, poor old man, was completely lost, not knowing how to handle a situation that totally escaped religious protocol. He must never have gone through such a situation in decades of priesthood. His hands were trembling, holding the prayer book, his face as pale as the white cassock. "My children, perhaps it's better to interrupt the ceremony for now." And he tried to speak with that gentle voice of always, wanting to calm tempers, trying to find a diplomatic way out of the situation, but I interrupted him before he could finish. "No, Father, I don't want to interrupt anything. I want everyone to hear what I have to say to the end." My voice echoed through the church with a determination I didn't even know I had. I want everyone to know what kind of man has been living among you for years. Pretending to be a good person, pretending to be the exemplary son, the protective brother. I want you to see the mask falling, to see the monster that hides behind the false smile and sweet words. Because if I don't speak now, if I let this opportunity pass, he will continue out there, free, loose, respected, capable of doing the same thing to other women, to other innocent victims. The church had become a boiling cauldron of emotions, with people standing up, speaking loudly, pointing at Richard, who now was sweating cold, trying to find a way out, an explanation, an excuse that could save him from that hell that his own wickedness had created. And I was there in the center of it all, finally free to speak the truth I had kept for an hour, but that seemed like an eternity. Finally the owner of my own voice, of my own story, of my own justice. Richard tried to leave the church, but some men barred his way. My father's friend, who had known our family for years, held him by the arm and said, "Stay right there, Richard. If you didn't do anything wrong, there's no reason to run away." Richard's face was becoming more and more desperate. He must have realized he couldn't escape that. "Are you going to believe a hysterical woman? A woman who is clearly disturbed?" he shouted, trying to defend himself. But his voice came out high-pitched, desperate. Eunice has always been a bit unbalanced, always made up stories to get attention. Now she invented this one to avoid getting married. That's when my mother stood up. My mother, who had always been a quiet, submissive woman, who had never contradicted any man in her life. "Richard," she said, with a voice I had never heard before, "look into my eyes and tell me you didn't do what your sister is saying." He tried to sustain her gaze, but couldn't. He lowered his head, and right there everyone knew it was the truth. "I know you're wondering if I really had the courage to say this in church, in front of everyone. And let me tell you, yes, I did. Because when a woman is backed into a corner, she finds a strength she never knew she had. What happened after that moment changed not just my life, but many others. Because when a woman decides to speak the truth, even if it hurts, even if it wounds, the consequences can be much greater than anyone imagines. And you'll see that justice sometimes comes from where you least expect it." After my mother asked that question, looking into Richard's eyes, the silence that took over the church was chilling. It was one of those heavy silences where it seems even the air stops circulating. Everyone looking at him, waiting for an answer, waiting for him to deny firmly, but he couldn't. He stayed there with his head down, sweating cold, trembling like a leaf. It was Mr. Joseph, an old friend of my father, who broke the silence. "Richard, answer your mother, boy. If you didn't do anything, why do you have that guilty face?" That's when it exploded. Several men stood up at the same time with that face of someone who wanted to do justice with their own hands. "You scoundrel! How could you do such a thing to your own sister?" My father's friend, who had held Richard's arm before, now tightened with more force. "Wretch, on the girl's wedding day no less, what kind of monster are you?" Other men began to approach, closing the circle. Things were getting ugly, and Richard realized there was no way to escape anymore. Desperation took hold of him. The women were divided. Some came in my direction, surrounding me, protecting me. "Poor thing, how horrible! How could he dare? The girl is in shock." Others were too horrified to react. They could only cry and whisper prayers. My Aunt Gloria hugged me tightly and said, "Daughter, you were very brave indeed." But there was a group of men that was becoming more and more violent. John from the bakery shouted, "Let's finish this wretched man right now. People like this don't deserve to live." And they began to surround Richard in a way that frightened me. As much as I hated him at that moment, I didn't want to see a lynching inside the church. "People, calm down, please." Father Anthony tried to calm tempers, but the situation was getting out of control. "This is the house of God. Let's resolve this with civility." But who was listening to priests at that hour? People were too outraged, especially the family men who had daughters. That's when Richard, cornered, began to speak in a rush. "It wasn't anything like what she's saying. It was she who came on to me, she who seduced me. But that made it even worse. People became even more outraged with the blatant lie. "Besides being a rapist, he's a liar," shouted someone from the back. "Wants to blame the victim?" My father, who until then had been quiet, in shock, got up slowly. I'll never forget the look on his face at that moment. It was a mixture of pain, disappointment, and rage that was pitiful to see. "Richard," he said with a voice I had never heard, "you are my son, but what you did is unforgivable. Unforgivable, neither in this world nor in the next." Then Richard went into total despair. He began to cry, to beg. "Dad, you don't understand. I was drunk. I didn't know what I was doing." But with each word that came out of his mouth, the situation got worse. "Oh, so you confess you did it?" shouted Mr. Joseph. "Now you're admitting what you did to your sister." The confusion was so great that the priest had to take drastic action. "People, please. I'm going to lock Richard in the back room and call the police. We can't do justice with our own hands." Some men helped the priest drag Richard, who was now crying and begging for forgiveness. Meanwhile, I remained there at the altar, still dressed as a bride, watching that horror movie that my wedding had become. Alvin didn't let go of my hand for even a second. "You were very brave," he whispered in my ear. "Very brave, and I love you even more for it." At that moment, I felt I had chosen the right man to marry. The priest sent someone to fetch the police, and in less than half an hour the officers arrived. The sheriff was an acquaintance of the family, Mr. Mark, who was shocked when he learned what it was about. "But how, Richard? I've known you all since childhood. How could you do such a thing?" Even the authority was outraged. When they came to get Richard from the little room, he tried once more to lie, to invent that I had set it all up to avoid getting married. But then the sheriff looked at me, saw my condition, saw the marks, and said, "Richard, you're getting yourself more and more tangled up, boy. It's better to stop lying and admit what you did." They placed him under arrest right there in front of everyone. When they handcuffed Richard, he looked at me with a hatred I'll never forget. "You'll regret this, Eunice. You'll regret it for the rest of your life." Even arrested, even humiliated, he still tried to threaten me, but now I was no longer afraid of him. Now I had a voice, I had support, I had people who believed in me. They took him away, and the church gradually emptied. People came to congratulate me, to say I had been brave, that I had done the right thing, but it was also possible to see that some were too shocked to know how to react. After all, it's not every day that a wedding turns into a police case, right? What happened after he was put in jail was swift justice of the harshest kind. Though I won't go into the horrible details, suffice it to say that Richard never survived his first night in jail. The inmates had their own code, and they made sure he paid for what he did to his own sister. The news reached home on Sunday morning, very early, when the sun had barely risen. Sheriff Mark personally came to give the news with that solemn face of someone who is going to communicate a tragedy. He knocked on the door, took off his hat, and with that heavy voice said, "Mrs. Constance, Mr. John, I have sad news to give you. Richard died in jail during the night." My mother collapsed in tears right away, a deep, heart-rending cry that came from the depths of her soul. Even after everything that had happened, even knowing the monstrosity he had committed, he was her son, right? He had come from her womb, had nursed at her breast, had been raised with her love. A mother's heart can't simply erase 29 years of love in a split second. My father remained silent, thoughtful, with that way of a man who processes information slowly before reacting. He looked at the floor, shook his head, sighed deeply. After a few minutes, he only said, "Perhaps it's better this way. At least now it's over." And he was right. Justice had been done, even if not by the hands of official law. It was a strange mixture of feelings that took hold of the family that Sunday. Relief at knowing the monster would never be able to harm anyone again. Sadness for the way everything had ended. Shame for what he had done, and a strange peace, as if finally the nightmare had come to an end. The sheriff still explained that he would have to open an inquiry, that it was normal procedure when someone died in jail, but everyone knew it wouldn't lead to anything. Accidents happen, he said, winking his eye, especially with people who commit this type of crime. The inmates themselves do justice when the law takes too long. And that's how Richard's story ended. The man who for years pretended to be protective, respectable, an example of a son, died as he really was. A monster despised even by criminals themselves. The mask had definitely fallen, and beneath it was only rottenness, only filth, only pure evil. When I learned that my brother had died in jail, do you know what I felt? Relief. And now tell me something, looking into my eyes, do you think I'm a bad person for feeling relief at the death of my own brother? What would you have felt? Because even today there are people who look at me askance, as if I were to blame for his death. Yes, I felt relief because I knew he would never be able to harm me or any other woman again. Because I knew I wouldn't have to live in fear of meeting him in the street, of hearing his threats, of having to prove for the rest of my life that I was telling the truth. His death was terrible, violent, but it brought a peace I hadn't felt since that cursed morning. The funeral was awkward. Few people went, and those who did stayed in a heavy silence. There was no way to cry for someone who had done what he did. My parents suffered a lot, of course, but they also understood that perhaps it was better this way. At least now it's over, my father said softly, at the edge of the grave. And he was right. It really was over. After all that apocalyptic confusion, my life turned completely upside down. It was as if I had thrown a stone in a calm lake and now had to deal with the infinite waves spreading in all directions. The months that followed were the most difficult of my existence, more difficult even than that cursed day at the church, because now I had to live with the consequences of my courage. The whole town talked about what had happened, and when I say whole town, I mean the whole town. It became the subject of all breakfasts, all gossip, all meetings in the square. And not always positively. Don't think that everyone supported me like heroes of justice. No way. There were people who supported me, who said I had done the right thing, that I had been brave in exposing a monster. Eunice saved other women from going through the same thing, some said. Imagine how many others he would have violated if he had remained free, commented others. These people looked at me with respect, with admiration even, but there were also those, and they weren't few, who whispered behind my back. Like venomous serpents who said I had destroyed my own family out of revenge, out of jealousy, out of whatever diabolical motive they invented. The family was so good, so respected, they whispered. Now look what's left. One dead, one crazy, and the parents destroyed. Some even insinuated with that malice disguised as concern that I might have made it all up to get attention, to be the center of attention, to not get married for some hidden reason. Just imagine the cruelty. As if a woman would invent such a story, destroy her own wedding, cause the death of her own brother, shake an entire family just out of caprice, just for drama. Could it be she was afraid of getting married and invented this whole story? I would hear in the corners. Could it be that she seduced him and then regretted it? Others commented with that disgusting malice. It was as if I had to prove every blessed day that I had really been violated, as if carrying the trauma wasn't enough. But that's how it is, right, my dears? There are always people who prefer to doubt the victim, to question others' suffering, than to accept that respected, admired people, considered exemplary, can be monsters beneath the social mask. It's easier to blame the woman than to admit they didn't know how to judge anyone's character. The male chauvinism of that time, and that still exists today, let's be honest, always found a way to blame the victim. She provoked, she invented, she exaggerated, she wanted revenge, as if being attacked was a choice, as if destroying one's own life was a well-elaborated diabolical plan. Alvin was my safe harbor in that stormy time, my island of peace in the middle of the social hurricane that had formed around me. He never, not for a single second, doubted me. On the contrary, He supported me from the first moment with a loyalty that made me cry with gratitude. He said I had been the bravest woman he knew, that I was an example of strength and dignity. "You showed me who you really are," he told me a few days after what happened, holding my hands with that infinite delicacy of his. "And I love you even more for it. You could have stayed silent, you could have pretended nothing happened, but you chose the truth even knowing it would hurt. That's real courage." What a difference it made to have someone who believed in me unconditionally. What a relief it was to have a man who saw me as a brave woman, not as a damaged victim. What a blessing it was to have by my side someone who understood that speaking the truth had been an act of bravery, not of madness. But getting married right after all that, as if nothing had happened, just wasn't possible. I needed time to heal inside, to process all that terrible trauma, to be able to distinguish between the monster who violated me and the good man who wanted to marry me. I needed to learn to trust again, to give myself again, to believe that not every man was like Richard. And Alvin understood perfectly, with that wisdom of the heart that only those who truly love have. "We'll wait as long as necessary," he said, "without pressure, without demand, without impatience. When you feel ready, really ready, we'll get married, and it will be our way, in our time, with our true happiness." What a blessed man, my God. What a beautiful soul the Lord put in my life. During this recovery time that lasted almost a whole year, he helped me overcome the trauma with the patience of a saint, with a love that healed more than any medicine. He never pressured me for anything, never made me feel that I was dirty, or marked or damaged by what had happened to me. On the contrary, he always treated me as if I were the most precious thing in the world, as if I were a treasure that needed to be cared for with great affection. Gradually, week after week, month after month, I began to realize that not every man was like Richard, that true love existed in the world, that there was still goodness in humanity. Alvin showed me, through small but significant gestures, that a real man protects, doesn't hurt, that a real man respects, doesn't violate, that a real man loves, doesn't dominate. They were months of slow, more solid reconstruction, like someone rebuilding a house destroyed by a hurricane. Brick by brick, feeling by feeling, trust by trust. He never tried to rush anything, never forced intimacy, never made me feel guilty for needing time. It was as if he understood that I had to heal at my own pace. A year later, in March 1972, exactly 1 year after that nightmare, we finally got married in a small, intimate ceremony, just with close family and close friends. Nothing crowded, nothing with exaggerated pomp, nothing that could arouse morbid curiosity or malicious comments. It was in a simple, small chapel, far from all that traumatic agitation of the first time. I wore a simple but beautiful white dress, without a veil because veils reminded me of that terrible day, without great pomp or exaggerated ornaments. The important thing wasn't the appearance, it was the true feeling. It was the genuine love we felt for each other. It was the certainty that this time we were going to start our life based on truth, on trust, on mutual respect. This time, when the priest asked if anyone had anything against the marriage, everyone laughed softly, with that affectionate laugh of someone who understood the painful but overcome reference. The priest himself, who already knew our story, made an affectionate little joke. This time, I think we can skip that part, right? Everyone here only has blessings to give to you two. And it was like that, with genuine lightness, with true joy, with love tested and approved by difficulties, that my married life with Alvin began. A life that would last 53 blessed years. A life that would teach me that it's worth fighting for the truth, that it's worth having courage, that it's worth believing that after the storm always comes the calm. The first years were of much learning. I had to learn to trust again, to truly give myself. Alvin was patient, affectionate, respected my time for everything, never demanded anything from me, never made me feel guilty for my fears and traumas. On the contrary, he helped me build a new self-esteem. In 1975, our first daughter, Anne Claire, was born. What immense joy it was to hold that little creature in my arms. It seemed that finally, my life had found its purpose. 2 years later, came Peter, our little one. 2 wonderful children who grew up in a house full of love and respect. We raised them with much dialogue, much transparency. When they grew up and asked about Uncle Richard, we told the truth in a way appropriate for their age. We wanted them to know they could tell us anything, that we would always be on their side, no matter what happened. Anne Claire graduated in nursing and married an Italian she met in college. Today, she lives in Italy with her husband and my grandson, Marco. They come to spend Christmas here every year. It's such a longing when they go away, but I'm happy knowing she is fulfilled, that she built the life she dreamed of. Peter followed a different path, became a teacher, and preferred to stay around here. He lives in the neighboring district with his wife and 2 children. He comes to my house almost every day, especially after Alvin began to become more fragile. He's my companion, my right arm. It's been 53 years of happy marriage. 53 years. It seems little when we're living it, but when we stop to count, we see how much it was, how much shared life. Alvin taught me that true love exists, that a real man protects, doesn't hurt, that family isn't just blood, it's who stays by your side in the difficult hour. In all these years, I've learned some important things I want to share with you. First, the truth hurts, but lies kill from inside. If I had stayed quiet that day, I would have died little by little, day after day. Speaking caused confusion, changed everything, but it freed me. Second thing, family isn't just blood, it's who truly protects you. Richard was my blood brother, but who really protected me was Alvin. It was the friends who believed in me. It was the people who stood by my side. Family, we choose too. Third, courage isn't not being afraid, it's doing what's right even with fear. I was dying of fear at that altar, trembling like a leaf, but I spoke anyway. Because sometimes we have to choose between fear and what's right. And doing what's right is always worth it. The fourth thing, and perhaps the most important, not every man is the same. I could have been traumatized by men for the rest of my life. I could have generalized, thought all were like Richard. But Alvin taught me there are good men, men who respect, who protect, who truly love. During all these years, many women have come to talk to me. Women who went through similar situations, who were afraid to speak, afraid people wouldn't believe them. I always said the same thing. Daughter, speak. It might hurt, it might complicate things, but speak, because who doesn't speak dies inside. Some listened to me, others thought I was crazy. How did you have the courage, Mrs. Eunice? How did you manage to destroy your own family? And I always answered, my child, it was he who destroyed the family, not me. I just told the truth, and the truth doesn't destroy anything worthwhile. Alvin passed away 3 years ago in 2022. He went in peace, sleeping without suffering. In his last days, he would say, my Eunice, I don't regret a single day I spent with you. They were the best 53 years of my life. And for me too. Even beginning in such a terrible way, we built a beautiful story together. Today I live alone in this little house, but I don't feel alone. The children visit often, the grandchildren visit me, and you all on the other side of the screen keep this old lady company. I still wake up every day thanking for having had courage in that March of 1971. Courage to speak, to face, to begin again. I am Eunice Coleman. You can call me Grandma Eunice. And this was the story that completely changed the course of my life. A story that taught me that sometimes life puts us at a crossroads where there are only 2 paths. You stay silent and die inside, or you shout the truth and are reborn. If you want to know more stories of women who chose to be reborn, because I believe that each story of courage we tell here can save the life of someone who is watching. And now I'm going to prepare a coffee for my Alvin. Oh no, I forgot he's no longer here. But I'll make it anyway, and drink it thinking of him and the 53 years he never gave me reason to doubt true love. Don't forget to like this video and comment where you're watching from.